Good morning, everyone. This is my pleasure to introduce Professor Indranil Acharya. Professor Acharya is the former head of the Department of English, Vidyasagar University, Midnapur, West Bengal. He completed 2 UGC projects on Australian and Indian indigenous traditions in 2009 and 2015, with special reference to unwritten languages, oral literatures, and tribal cultures. His authored, edited, translated books are beyond the sense of belonging, race, class, and gender in the poverty of Yeats and Eliot in 2011. Survival and Other Stories, Anthology of Bangla Dalit Stories, Orient Black Swan 2012. Towards Social Change, Essays on Dalit Literature, OBS 2014. Listen to the Flames, Texts and Reading from the Margins, Oxford University Press 2016. Paschim Banger Bhasha, Languages of West Bengal, OBS 2017. Smriti Milopir Pore, After Amnesia, G.N. Devai, OBS 2017. Dr. Acharya is also the editor of Jonojati Dorpon, the only international multilingual series from Bengal on tribal studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Indon, for your very kind and generous introduction. And I would heartily welcome all the panelists for today's session, that is session 7A on literary movements. I warmly welcome the speakers of this session, Mohammed Bagher Shabanpur, Mrunal Chawda Lahari Vandana, and Rafid C. So I welcome you all, and let us try to restrict our presentation to 15 minutes, and after that we can have an interaction, and in a way we can follow this pattern that the individual presenter will finish his or her presentation, and immediately after that we will take a few questions from the learned audience, and in this way we will proceed to the next speaker. So please try to maintain the time limit. And with this, I would now request the first panelist of today's session. Actually, we have to find out where is session B. I'm chairing session A, so please talk to Rindon. He will be able to tell you where is session 7B. So I would now invite the first speaker, Mohammed Bagher Shabanpur, and the title of his presentation is Arabian Nights and Sadek Hadiyats, Cases of Multifarious Literary Receptions. Please pardon my pronunciation, as I'm not very familiar with the exact pronunciation of the words. And let me introduce the first speaker of this session. Mohammed Bagher Shabanpur is an English literature PhD candidate at the University of Tehran. He is currently studying on different facets of neoliberal space in McEwan's novels, with special interests in Harvey's critique of capitalism and its manipulation of space. He is currently teaching courses on English literature at the University of Mazandaran and film at Ruzbahan University. So I would now request Mohammed Bagher Shabanpur to make his presentation. Please. Hello. Is the panelist present here? Hello. Rindon, would you assist me? Is the panelist present here?
Indranil, I think he is not there.
Okay.
I think you can start from the second panelist.
Okay, thank you. So let us move on to the second panelist of this session, Mrunal Chavda, Lahari Bandana. The title of the presentation is A Glimpse into South African Gujarati Bhakti Literature. And let me introduce the panelists. Mrunal Chavda holds a doctorate in drama from the University of Exeter, in which he looks at developing Bharata's Natya Shastra based performance analysis model in the contexts of British South Asian theatre and contemporary Indian theatre in English. Currently, he works as an assistant professor, business communication at the Indian Institute of Management, Raipur, Chhattisgarh. Okay, please make your presentation. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Acharya. Am I audible?
Yes, you are perfectly audible.
Okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Acharya, for that wonderful introduction. Today I'm going to take you through some of the unexplored literature from South Africa, written in Gujarati. And from that, we'll talk about how it is related to Bhakti literature. So the outline for today's presentation is we will talk about documentation of South African Gujarati literature, and then I'll try to locate my research from diaspora studies to Gujarati, to Indian diaspora, and then to Gujarati diaspora, and then to Bhakti literature, and then I'll specifically focus on Lallubai Haribai, who is the author of Lahari Bandana. So this is where I started my research in 2017, 2018, where I was having a postdoctoral research fellowship in social linguistics. My fieldwork included in the cities like Cape Town, Durban, Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Benoni. Now, these are very important places because these are the places flooded with Gujarati migrants in South Africa. Let me come to this locating the research that I'm presenting today. Diaspora studies is a well-established field, and I don't need any further inputs on that. Indian diaspora has spread in almost 110 countries with over 25 million population. With this Indian diasporic group, Gujarati diaspora success is evident with regularly mediatized names such as Lord Balakia, Lord Bhikkhu Parekh, and Lord Meghna Desai, and you can count n number of names and you can add. The Indian diasporic writing for this research, I have divided it into two broad categories. One which is published in English, and that includes writers such as Salman Rushdie, Vikram Seth, V.S. Naipaul. These are well studied by scholars, and you have ample of literature available. However, studies on Indian writing in English from South Africa, which Pallavi Rastogi identifies as South African Indian writings, is just a recent phenomenon. The second category, which is my focus, is published in Indian regional languages. Now, this includes, and this list is not exclusive, it can include as many as language possible. Punjabi, Tamil, Gujarati. Balwant Jani, he is extremely meticulous about documenting 33 volumes of Gujarati diasporic writing. These writings have been published in United States and UK. However, this is a big however. South African Gujarati writings is not part of the discussion on any of Gujarati literary tradition. My article is published by Sahitya Akademi, Gujarati Sahitya Akademi in 2018, which talks about that. However, let me take you to Gujaratis in South Africa, how these entrepreneurs migrated from 1890 and up to 1994, because that phase is very crucial for the understanding of what we are going to talk about. There are 15,41,113 Gujaratis, Hindus in South Africa as of now, and out of that, 5,61,268 follow Hinduism. We'll talk about what are the branches of Hinduism they follow. But Gujaratis, as you know, have always been placed as financially better off among the diaspora. However, the trend started with Muslim Memons, Bohras, and they were joined later on by the Hindu Gujaratis, who involved in commerce and trade. Now, what kind of commerce and trade? You can talk of fruiterers, you can talk of vegetable hawkers, you can talk about mochis, you can talk about any vocational which was required in the 19th century, all were part of that, right? Grocerer. With this migration, their ethnicity also migrated, their caste also migrated, and religion. These are very important concepts which can be found in their literature, in their organization, and the kind of institutes they have built in South Africa. According to these, there are 5 major streams of the religion, Hindu religion in South Africa. One is traditional ritualistic. The second is Arya Samaji. The third is Neo-Vedantic. Fourth, ISKCON. And then later on, around 1990s afterwards, the Sai Baba and later on Swaminarayan sect also emerged as one of the religious communities in South Africa. There are few reasons why people migrate, and it is well established in the literature, but let me focus on Gujarati migration to South Africa. The first and foremost, as we know, indentured labor, but Gujaratis were not part of the indentured labor. They were part of free passengers. They bought their own passage to South Africa. So the growth and development of colonial economy was one of the reasons. The second was droughts. During 1890 to 1920, there were 27 droughts in Gujarat alone. So you can imagine if if India is considered an agricultural based economy, what farmers will do. So they migrated to South Africa, where there was growth and development in the economy. The third important reason, Abhijit Benner and Iyer has highlighted in their research paper titled as History, Institutions and Economic Performances, the Legacy of Colonial Land Tenure Systems in India, where they focus what are the British land policies and how it affects the migration. So this was another reason. And the final, the plagues. Surat has experienced plagues for many centuries, and it has been recurrent. We have witnessed it in recent a decade before. Uma Dupelia identifies that in one of her papers called Shoemakers, where Natwar Patel, one of the respondents, talks about how plagues affected the migration of these people. Now, when we talk about the South African migration, we have to talk about gender issues, which Kalpana Hiralal is identifying very interestingly. Only male with high sought after vocation traits, such as dhobis, mochis, and farmers, were migrating. No females, not free passenger Indian females. They were part of indentured labor, but free passenger Indian females started migrating after 1900s. Right? So this is really interesting, and this is well documented in Hiralal's article in 2015. The caste, which is very crucial factor for Gujarati identity, which has been located in Maya Parmar's double diaspora, that caste do not leave them even if they migrate, right? However, in South African case, the Jahaji identity, the Jahaji brethren identity, where you have to sit on one deck, right, irrespective of your caste, this consolidated their identity as Gujaratis. And this was very crucial for their later growth and development. You know, Gujarati is an Indo-Aryan language, which Lallu Hari is going to write in this language. And almost all Gujaratis who migrated during this period are going to produce literature in this language. So they know language, at least they read, write, and speak. So has a literary tradition, and the migration when it happened, it was during the Pandit era of Gujarati literature. So that is when Saraswati Chandra was published in 1887, the migration was about to take place gradually. Now, if we look at the kind of literature produced in Pandit era, Isaka, in one of his, in her writing, she identifies that mostly high caste Hindu Nagar Brahmins are producing this literature. Now, these are Sanskritized literature, and all of the writings are influenced by the Western canonical writings. Saraswati's novel, Saraswati as a novel itself, the form itself is borrowed from the Western. So we can discuss that. These migrants who went to South Africa from the plague affected areas, drought affected areas, and looking for better economic opportunities were mostly from the vocational trades. And once they migrated, their social upward mobility started. And Uma Dhupelia Mistry is documenting it very clearly in her article. What they are doing is trying to maintain their language, because language, as we know, is very much associated with the identity. The Gujarati speak Gujarati, and therefore they are Gujarati. So they try to maintain their language through writing, through running schools, through worshipping in Gujarati. Now, they express their devotion. That's where I'm going to come now. The devotion is expressed through dance. Garbas are very important aspect. They write. We know that how much Bhakti literature is produced in Gujarati. And that started in the 15th century onwards, when Narsi Mehta started. Sachin Ketkar's work is very evident. Nilima Shukla Bhatt is evident when we talk of Narsi Mehta. Same as Mirabai, Akho, and Roshan Dayar for Dayaram. So there are studies on Bhakti literature written in Gujarati. But there are other literary traditions for Jain, which is written in Pali Prakrit and Apabhransha. And there are others as well, like Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, and Urdu. However, let me concentrate the neglected part where South African Gujarati writer, not just one writer, the entire the generations of writers have been erased. We will talk about the reasons as well later on as we move on. But this is the person, the first photograph where you see the person standing is our main hero, Lallu Haribai. He was born in 1897. He is a very small village in Undaj, Valsad, Surat district. He's a shoemaker, right? Sixth pass, migrated to South Africa. That's where the picture is taken. Later on, you can see his wife. On the other hand, he is standing with his wife on the Birimora railway station, and 4th March, 4th April, right, 1950. He learned to write English during a court case. That court case went very long, and it was to impeach the past president of London Hindu Society. And that's where he started to learn English. He did not know how to read and write in English. He knew, right, reading and writing in Gujarati. And as a member of East London Hindu Society, which is located in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, he and the community, Gujarati community, were frequently visited by religious scholars like Pandit Bhavani Dayal in 1933, Swami Adyanandaji of Belur Math in 1934, and Pandit Harishankar Vidyarthi of Anand in 1936. He was influenced by them. But what influenced him towards religious writing was an article on yoga published in Vishwajyoti in 1927. Now, these articles, these magazines were constantly exchanged between India and South Africa. No, Pandit Dayal is there visible, and you can see the photograph. Because of his contribution, he was given silver Tanbura by the South African Mahasabha, South African Kshatriya Mahasabha. Kshatriya and Mochis are almost same, but it's a very interesting story. Now, this is where you can find his readers. You can see almost except Americans, the entire world has his readership. Europe, Africa, India, and Oceania. Now, what I'm going to present you is unpublished work, like the works which were sent to his friends, family members, or even relatives as a part of his reflection on religious readings. And out of those religious readings, he is able to discuss the philosophical, mystical, and complex questions of life and its answers, not only by himself, but by the the information that he has read so far in the religion. So you can see this, how much volume, the scale of his work, number of pages and number of copies sent across the world. Across the world means this part of the world, free of cost, right? So he used to get it published from these three places. One, Ahmedabad. Second, Surat, the southern part, where Bidemora, Surat, and Vapi. These are three places from Gujarat. And then he invested in a press, printing press. I remind you that he is a shoemaker and he does not know anything about press. Right? He invested in printing press and it was installed in East London. Now, based on that understanding of printing press and how does it work, today they are the proud owners of Harris Printing Press in East London. And you can visit the website and you can search in Google as well, and they are still there. Very interesting. So let me come to one of the poems that I'm trying to analyze. I'm not a good translator, so this is just for the sake of this conference. But if you find, you can suggest that I can continue. So in one of the poems, he talks about the common man's vocabulary. Because you have to understand that in those times, when people were migrating to South Africa, they were taking ships and they were not really literate in the real sense. So it was very important to use the vocabulary that they understand. The rice becomes a very interesting symbol. And you can see he goes on that how it tastes differently if you cook it differently, right? So he is trying to mix and match all religions, all the sects, all the identity, and he brings that core aspect in the last line, and that is samatva. The concept of samatva is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2 and verse 48. Right? In those times, Bhagavad Gita was not translated as widely as possible. At least in Gujarat, what kind of edition he was reading, what kind of understanding he was developing, this is really an interesting way to understand. The concept of samatva says, in the chapter 2 of verse 8, it says, be steadfast in the performance of your duty, O Arjuna, abandoning attachment to success and failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. So his writing is leading towards the concept of yoga. So he is not saying like Kabir that the God is universal and there are many different forms. He says that you have to inculcate this yogic tradition within you, and that's how you can take it forward, this spiritual enlightenment. So it's a very individualistic approach that he's suggesting. In doing yoga, he says that concept of surrendering is very important. So we can say he is following the Vaishnava's path, but right, his destination is yoga. His reaching his destination is different, but his way of reaching is yoga. With a meager intellect in the whole world, oh Shamar. Again, this is a reference to Narsi Mehta's work. I consider me a tiny particle, and you are hidden somewhere within me. I don't know whether you can recall Narsi Mehta's writing, but this is really a reflective of that. Now he prays for the peace. Again, here he is trying to bring three different layers of understanding that can cause inconvenience to any individual. In Sanskrit, that is called Trivida Tapa, right? So he talks about individual level, body and mind, and then society around us, the people, and then the nature, controllable and uncontrollable phenomena. And he wants to bring this peace to everybody. And one can attain through yoga. And that's what he is trying to find out in the fifth line. Each so readily all to follow, yam niyam. So if you follow yoga, you will find this peace. And he is continuously in all his writings, brings that element into his writing. So, what is his contribution to South African Gujarati literature? Is that his writings resonate Bhakti literature produced in 15th century, but there is a slight deviation. We can call it an alternative Bhakti literary tradition from South Africa, written in Gujarati. We are all very good at nomenclature, but still, we have to identify this. It is written in Gujarati in South Africa, but it never became a part of Gujarati literary tradition or even movement. Instead, it gradually erased due to no contact with home, the apartheid year, right? Long apartheid in South Africa made this possible, which was very unfortunate, but it happened. And during that period, the next generation of readers started to lose contact with the Gujarati, the home language. And now almost everybody in South Africa is having a problem with this. So let me take this couple of more minutes and then I'll conclude.
Yes.
So, thank you. So after 1990s, the priest who followed South Africa, they promoted a different kind of ritualistic traditions which were existing in previous years. They were following different Arya Samaj traditions. But here, now the entire religious traditions were changed. And because of that, 19th century literary scholars, South African readers, and even literary historians have not looked at the South African Gujarati literature from any radar, right? Despite the fact that it reached 4 continents into the world. Bhakti was traded in Narsi Mehta's term, and he preached yoga to every Hindu households in 4 different continents, even before the Prime Minister announced that yoga has to be practiced across the world. He was the person. And because it is located in a geographical boundary where it is difficult to get into, his contribution to the global engagement has not taken place yet. So this paper, I really thank the organizers to give me an opportunity to talk about Gujarati Bhakti literature written in South Africa, despite the fact that I have not submitted the full paper. I thank you, Dr. Professor Ravi Bhochal and the entire committee for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mrinal Chawda. And thank you for your brilliant presentation and intensely thought-provoking, presentation on the tradition of Gujarati Bhakti literature in South Africa. And I'm sure that this paper has been able to stimulate a lot of, questions or maybe a lot of ideas in the minds of the esteemed listeners here, the participants, and I would request some of you to put before Dr. Chawda any comment, any question, anything in connection with his presentation. Please, we are inviting questions. You can put it in the chat box as well, if you like. Any comment or any observation? Hello.
Can I make a point?
Yes, Professor Satyanath. Yes, please.
This is Satyanath.
Yes.
In the morning, we had a session in which actually the entire material belonging to the Indo-Persian culture was somehow masked or erased or ignored. I think the Gujarati situation in South Africa appears to be a situation of a similar sort, wherein the efforts and the material that was produced did not become a part of academic canon. I think it's very important for us to, I like the paper because it's very important for us to draw the attention of the scholars. What political implications that it can do is immaterial, but it's very important to bring these things to the notice of the scholarship so that the further work can be pursued in this regard. Thank you very much for bringing this to the conference.
Thank you, Professor Satyanath.
Thank you, Professor Satyanath, for your comment. And we can still have, time to invite one or two comments or questions. If yes.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Professor Nambi sir. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Ramakrishnan. I was listening to this paper. You see, this is also the time, the late 19th century, when Mahatma Gandhi was in South Africa.
Exactly.
And he carried on his, actually he brought out Indian opinion in 4 languages. There's a very interesting book called Gandhi's Printing Press. And it talks about the experiments he conducted with printing and you see in English, Gujarati, Hindi and one more language. Tamil, exactly. So it's a multilingual kind of situation where people from many languages are settled in South Africa. They are in trade, they are in professions, and they all have their contacts with the home situations. So this kind of interactions are very interesting. In diaspora studies, we need to, which actually is a subject close to comparative literature, even this establishing of printing. The printing becomes the medium now. You said these journals published in Gujarati were available in South Africa. And that's very interesting. You see, it is through the circulation. How does literature circulate? The very idea of circulation needs to be looked at. And the diaspora literature very often takes unusual forms. It may take the form of letter. You see, letters are very important. It can be personal kind of communication. It could be letter sent to officials or such. We need to treat them as part of a larger diaspora kind of literature. Another kind of, there may be incidents happening and maybe detailed reports of such happenings. Because I speak from my experience when I looked at Malayalam literature in some of the journals in the early 20th century. There was somebody who was in London, so he will write London letter. So that became actually and people were eager to know what was happening in Europe, in Russia, in many parts of the world. So I am sure you need to actually pursue both this. What was the kind of larger world Lalubhai Haribhai actually was involved with? His association with, it was not an exclusively Gujarati community he was dealing with. He was dealing with a transnational, a cosmopolitan community. But his writings are more of a Gujarati traditional bhakti kind. And that actually, he is not writing about the political or the social in the diasporic community. And this also needs to be taken into account. Why does this kind of a writing interest him? Maybe the kind of alienation they felt, the kind of political, they were excluded from the centers of power. So this must have actually allowed them to negotiate situations of that kind. Extreme kind of alienation, extreme kind of political powerlessness. So was this a way of empowering, the Indian community, the idea of a larger, oneness of human race, the larger idea of, the human being not something racially divided. So there is a larger kind of function of what is the function of this kind of writing. That I think in exploring that you may arrive at a larger socio-political dimension of this writing. We cannot just dismiss them as yogic, dealing with bhakti, dealing with, they are actually talking of a larger kind of world. And that has something to do with the canonical. You mentioned Pandit Yuga.
Yes.
You see, this is happening, and as you rightly said, Saraswati Chandra is a major novel. It's trying to deal with a larger colonial imperial world. You see, Saraswati Chandra's larger function in Gujarati canon is to negotiate the larger colonial context. And what should actually, what way of, how should we define our identity in this peculiar context of transformation? So, Leelavati Jivanakale or this, and you can very well see these texts are negotiating imperial situation. And definitely Lalubhai's book also is, his writing also is negotiating an imperial situation. Location is different, but the language is the same. So I think you will see deeper meanings in the function of this kind of writing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Nambi-san. Thank you.